Welcome to the Timeless Talents channel. In today's video, we're diving into the world of Hollywood to explore some of the most famous real-life brothers and sisters. Get ready for an entertaining journey through sibling dynamics in Tinseltown. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to subscribe and show your support. Thank you for being here. Beau Bridges, 83 years old, and Jeff Bridges, 75 years old. Mark Ruffalo, 57 years old, and Scott Ruffalo, 39 years old. Alec Baldwin, 67 years old, and Daniel Baldwin, 65 years old. Martin Sheen, 85 years old, and Joe Estevez, 79 years old. Chris Evans, 44 years old, and Scott Evans, 41 years old. Ron Howard, 71 years old, and Clint Howard, 66 years old. Owen Wilson, 56 years old, and Andrew Wilson, 61 years old. Tom Hanks, 69 years old, and Larry Hanks, 72 years old. Charlie Sheen, 60 years old, and Emilio Estevez, 63 years old. Christopher Nolan, 55 years old, and Jonathan Nolan, 49 years old. Adam Arkin, 69 years old, and Matthew Arkin, 65 years old. Charlie Sheen, 60 years old, and Emilio Estevez, 63 years old. Rob Lowe, 61 years old, and Chad Lowe, 57 years old. Mark Wahlberg, 54 years old, and Donnie Wahlberg, 56 years old. Bill Murray, 75 years old, and Brian Doyle Murray, 80 years old. Stacy Keach, 84 years old, and James Keach, 77 years old. Aaron Ashmore, 46 years old, and Shawn Ashmore, 46 years old. Richmond Arquette, 62 years old, and David Arquette, 54 years old. Owen Wilson, 56 years old, and Luke Wilson, 54 years old. Joaquin Phoenix, 51 years old, and Liberty Phoenix, 49 years old. Chris Hemsworth, 42 years old, and Liam Hemsworth, 35 years old. Oliver Hudson, 49 years old, and Wyatt Russell, 39 years old. Will Smith, 57 years old, and Ellen Smith, 27 years old. Michael Madsen passed away in 2025, at the age of 67, and Virginia Madsen, 64 years old. Eddie Murphy, 64 years old, and Charlie Murphy passed away in 2017, at the age of 57. Bill Murray, 75 years old, and Joel Murray, 62 years old. James Franco, 47 years old, and Tom Franco, 45 years old. William Baldwin, 62 years old, and Stephen Baldwin, 59 years old. James Franco, 47 years old, and Dave Franco, 40 years old. Joaquin Phoenix, 51 years old, and River Phoenix passed away in 1993, at the age of 23. Dakota Johnson, 36 years old, and Jasper Breckenridge Johnson, 23 years old. Tony Goldwyn, 65 years old, and John Goldwyn, 67 years old. Ben Affleck, 53 years old, and Casey Affleck, 50 years old. Ewan McGregor, 54 years old, and Colin McGregor, 56 years old. Nick Jonas, 33 years old, and Frankie Jonas, 25 years old. John David Washington, 41 years old, and Olivia Washington, 34 years old. Max Irons, 40 years old, and Samuel Irons, 47 years old. Chris Hemsworth, 42 years old, and Luke Hemsworth, 44 years old. Dennis Quaid, 71 years old, and Randy Quaid, 75 years old. Kevin Jonas, 37 years old, and Joe Jonas, 36 years old. Mark Wahlberg, 54 years old, and Jim Wahlberg, 60 years old. Damon Wayans, 65 years old, and Shawn Wayans, 54 years old. John David Washington, 41 years old, and Malcolm Washington, 34 years old. Luke Goss, 57 years old, and Matt Goss, 57 years old.